Hey everyone, and welcome back to another video. Today I want to talk about things to look out for when you're buying a 105 series secondhand. Now, I'm going to make this really easy and break it into three categories for you guys: engine, body, and drivetrain. Now, we're going to be looking at the things that just probably need a bit of a close eye before you go and buy one of these things. Not necessarily things that go wrong, but just things that might need maintenance, things that are high maintenance on these, which isn't much, but there are just a few things that are worth just checking over and making sure they've been kept up to standard or replaced in their old age or some things like that. So let's get into it. Okay, so the first thing I would be looking at on a 1HZ in a 105 series is, does it have an aftermarket turbo? An aftermarket turbo can be the make or break of one of these engines. And there's a few tests you can do just to make sure that it's not the brake of the engine. The first one being blow-by. I would just be checking that there's not excessive blow-by, indicating that there is, well, first of all, a hole in the piston. You do not want it chuffing like a train. And just check for worn rings and stuff. Blow-by is good at that. If it's just pouring out of the oil cap, especially when you've tied off the positive crankcase ventilation, that shows there are possibly worn rings or something like that, maybe glazed pores, something like that going on. The next thing you can do is check the exhaust for excessive amounts of soot, because that indicates that it's probably running quite rich. And finally, a really good idea is to look for a dyno sheet if the seller has one, and check out that air fuel ratio, because you don't want that being really low. See here, the exhaust has a lot to answer for. So you're not necessarily looking for what's going on inside, but rather the ring on the outside here. You can see that there's a little bit of a black ring on the outside, which indicates there is a bit of fuel going on. If it's white or grey, it indicates it could be running kind of lean. So that's just a good telltale of what might be going on inside the combustion chamber. The second thing I'd generally be assessing on a 1HZ or any engine inside a 105 series is the hoses and general wear on just things that are perishable inside the engine. These do a lot of Ks and are often sold at quite high kilometres. For instance, this engine's done about 500,000, and you know, some of these things have possibly done more than that, because the car itself has actually done like 640,000. So I'd just be checking for hoses, do your general crack checks. You can see here that I possibly need to replace, I do need to replace that power steering hose. You know, hoses get old, they get brittle, they crack, they leak. So definitely a good thing to check secondly. And finally, a good thing to check on any car when you're buying is look for leaks. So look for oil leaks on the block, especially if there's been some aftermarket you know, oil senders fitted or coolant senders, like water temp sensors. Check for exhaust leaks on your manifold. If it's an aftermarket manifold especially, you'll see little black marks if there is a bit of a leak, but that's looking pretty good there. Oil around the turbo, which indicates that maybe the oil return wasn't fitted properly or there's some wear and tear going on somewhere. All these things are just good to check before buying a car. Okay, so the first thing I would be looking at on one of these things regarding the body is rust. They do get rust, especially around the coast, especially because they're taken on the beach often, through the sand dunes, all this stuff. The salt erodes away at the metal and you do get rust. So here's a few places just to check for that, especially on a 105 series. Number one is on top of the windscreen. I've had this replaced, this windscreen, and resealed really well because it did have rust, and you can see I've still got some bubbles to deal with that I definitely need to get on top of pretty soon, because they cause water to leak through and run down the pillar and into your carpet, and then your car smells awful, it's wet on the floor, and you have a bad time. So that would be my number one place to check: rust bubbles on the window. Ask if they've had the windscreen replaced and resealed, and if not, check for dampness in the footwell, in the driver's and passenger side. The second place that's worth checking is roof rack. Now that's a little bit tricky when it's got a roof rack on it, but if you have the chance to take these legs off, these mounts off, and just check the bolts for rust, that's a good idea, because if they're not fitted up properly, not sealed with the right washers or whatever, water can leak through there, and same deal, run down the pillar, end up in your footwell. So a good thing that I would be doing is just having a look under this mat and just checking for any dampness here, because that's going to be a real indicator if you've got any leaks going on up here. This one pains me to show you a little bit because it's something that I'm going to have to deal with pretty soon, and it doesn't look like a cheap spot. Right here, I've seen it get a lot worse than this. This is just the beginning, but it does rust in here. This is very common on 100 series and 105 series, and I can see it getting pretty bad. It gets into the whole panel here, and it just looks shocking, and it does not look cheap to fix. So get onto it as soon as you can. Okay, so something I haven't noticed so much on my Cruiser, but definitely seen on other 100 series and 105s, is rust around this rear window. And that's definitely something to look out for, just little bubbles and stuff, which I haven't seen much of. But you know, same deal, if there was rust around this back window, it would leak and you get water inside. The other thing worth mentioning on the body of these 105s is the door handles. They're not amazing, and they're prone to wear. So that's 640,000 K's worth of, you know, kids yanking them open and misuse and whatnot. So just look out for that, because I've had to replace this one. The plastic bit inside the latch wore out, and the handle just came straight out. So just look out for that, because they are prone to wear. Okay, so the last thing I want to talk about is drivetrain, and I'm going to start right up the front at the steering box. Yeah, that's a pretty common one on these live axle 105s, is the steering box wears out for some reason, and it leaks. And I'm just forever topping up my power steering fluid at the moment, because they can be quite expensive to recondition, anywhere between $500 and $800, I do believe. So let's have a look a bit closer. So behind this guard cover, you can see just the mess it makes. The power steering fluid is just weeping out of one of those seals, obviously, and trying to lubricate the whole steering dampener system, shocky, diff, yeah, it's all just quite an oily mess down there. So it's worth just having a look. They can be reconditioned, but obviously not easy to get to, not cheap, and a bit of a nightmare. Okay, so moving backwards from steering, the next thing that I would be wary of is the gearbox. The gearbox in these 105s with the 1HZ is an R series box. They're a lighter, weaker box put behind the 1HZ to save weight, because the 1HZ is not very powerful, and Toyota thought they could get away with putting a lighter box behind it just to make it obviously a bit lighter. So just be wary, especially if it's been turboed. There could be wear on the box. I've already had mine reconditioned, and that was before I even had the turbo on. That was way back at the start when I bought this thing, however long ago that was, 3 years ago. So yeah, they do wear out, worth keeping an eye on. Maybe even swap it out for a H-box if you are lucky enough to find one. So apart from that, guys, that's pretty much all I'd be really looking at in one of these things. Seriously, they're quite low maintenance, as long as they're well looked after, serviced regularly, you know, and serviced with care and love. You know, lubricate the bonnet latches and the door latches. Just keep that oil changed pretty regularly, anywhere between 5 and 10,000. I wouldn't ever do an oil change over 10,000, especially in an older diesel. Just, you know, give them some love, look after them, and they'll go forever. This body's done 640,000, and I don't know about you guys, but I think it looks really good. There's obviously a little bit of surface rust in some places, but it's nothing that I'm extremely worried about. Yeah, this car hasn't cost me much in maintenance. It's cost me a fair bit in mods. It owes me a lot in mods, as all of you know, I'm sure, but maintenance, no, it's pretty low. So yeah, I definitely recommend getting yourself a 105 series if you could. Look out for those few small things, but apart from that, yeah, you're pretty set to go touring, camping, four-wheel driving, mall crawling, whatever you want to do with it. So yeah, okay, that's all from me today, guys. Have a good one, and I will catch you in the next video.